Welcome to the Halaba Fantasy Football League. This is the final regular season, week 14 recap. Today's drink is a white Negroni. I know what you're thinking. No, it's not a urine sample. I tried making it earlier, and I gave some to Eric, and I think I used the wrong ingredient. I accidentally used dry vermouth or white vermouth instead of Lillet Blanc. So it does change the taste a little bit. But then the primary components is gin, Lillet Blanc, and Suze. It's a white Negroni. So if you like those dry drinks, this is pretty good. Has the nice bitter and smooth. All right, so this week was pretty interesting. There was a lot of upsets. Just as a general note, I think the longer the season goes on, the more there's some normalization that happens, right? The good teams kind of regress to the norm, and then the bad teams progress because they improve, and because of that, you see a lot of upsets. I was kind of disappointed to see the Lions lose, but that was understandable. I totally was not surprised that they lost that game. But that wasn't the only upset. There was a bunch of upsets, and then we'll get through them as we talk about some of the scores during the week. What does that mean for fantasy? It keeps it pretty interesting because, sometimes you just don't want to play players that are on bad teams, but like I said, they get better. And then sometimes you rely on players to be like out of this world crazy on the good teams, and they're not going to give you those wild scores in the beginning of the season. But this was an important one because it determined the final playoff spot, and I think it kind of boiled down to, like we said, it was Darren, Morgan, Eric, and Aaron. Ultimately, it boiled down to between Eric and Aaron. But we can go through a lot of the earlier scores, and I think we're just trying to get through them quickly because they don't have as much implication. Maybe, if anything, we'll just talk about how maybe an evaluation for the teams that are in the playoffs, what they're able to do, and what their prospects look like. Just a brief mention about that. Anyway, let's go to the first one of no consequence. Me and Milo versus Brownsville Jets. Again, as the Lions go, I go. My team kind of got stomped on. Brees Hall was had a good game. Gibbs was solid. Everything else was not much to write home about. For Mike, though, continues to look dangerous. Jalen Hurts, like we said, good team. Lost the second consecutive game, this time to Dallas, and he only had 12.18 points. Even Devontae Smith was subject to that. Really good games from DJ Moore and Saquon Barkley. Oh, that was a great game. That Giants versus Green Bay game at the end. Ooh, another upset. We're expecting Green Bay to win, but somehow Giants with Tommy DeVito pulled that off. Gus Edwards didn't do too much, even though that was pretty much of a shootout. And then TJ Hawkinson had a solid game. Cortland Sutton had a good game. New Orleans D, really good, but I think the story of here is his highest score was the kicker, Aubrey, kicking 3 field goals that were over 50 points. So that accounts for like 18 points right there, and higher. So that's a really, really nice bonus to have. So I think Mike is pretty set going forward. Anything on the bench? Will Levis was the other game was pretty huge. He looks good. So he kind of reminds me of Joe Burrow in terms of his poise. He's not like some of these other rookies who look in over his head. It actually looks like the team rallies around him. He made a lot of mistakes. Threw a pick that went for a touchdown. Had a fumble to Derrick Henry, and it looked like the game was over, but they rallied and they pulled off the upset, knocking off Miami. What an incredibly entertaining game that was. Not much else to mention on my bench. I think Mitchell is one to note. He's the newest running back on Baltimore, and he is kind of demonstrating that he's going to be a part of the team going forward. And then for Mike, Zeke Elliott, he has bell cow stats. Look at that, 70 and then 72 receiving yards. That's pretty great with a touchdown. So that's really nice to have on the bench. Yeah, and a nice luxury to have picked up Cole Kmet, who balled out in against Detroit. And yeah, so Mike is pretty set going forward. Let's skip Eric's score, and we'll skip Aaron's score because those are the two who are fighting for the last spot. This one was an interesting one. This is like the middle matchup, right? Darren versus Morgan. And this is interesting because like the winner, no matter winner or loser, they're going to I think they're going to match up again in the playoffs. But this is just to determine who gets the edge. Who gets 7-7, who gets 8-6. Morgan got this one, mostly because of a poor day by Darren. Patrick Mahomes, the big news was um, what's his name? Lining up off sides and Patrick Mahomes throwing a temper tantrum. They had this really amazing play to Travis Kelsey, who lateraled it for a touch. Would have been a game-winning touchdown, but it was nullified by a penalty. So Patrick Mahomes would have been much higher. Would have been a nice win, but they lose, and it's looking like it's really tough for them to be able to repeat as Super Bowl champions. Tyler Lock had a decent game. Chris Godwin, in this messy kind of game, he seemed to be like the wide receiver one over Evans. So that looks good for you. Christian McCaffrey had an okay game. He had a really nice breakout run right in the beginning of the game. Chuba Hubbard is also a nice pickup to have, like we said, someone to like take over the place for Jonathan Taylor, but he was otherwise it would not look your future would not look as bright. Justin Ferguson had a good game. He's solid as a tight end. I think if he gets in the end zone, this is even crazier. Downs as a player to play in here is did not that great. Butker not that great, and the Dallas D kind of looking. Actually, this is a good score for defense. It's just not the otherworldly score that we've been seeing prior to the last 2 weeks that they played. And then on the bench, a lot of question marks and doubtfuls, and I don't think you have much going for your bench. So we'll see. And then for Morgan, you're trending up, so that's good. Stafford is a great pickup for you because they look to be healthy and balling at the end of the year and trying to make the playoffs. So that is a great pickup for you. I know quarterback was a big question mark. Jamar Chase, this has been a roller coaster ever since you got Browning as the quarterback. It's hit or miss, but what can you do? You got to start him. But Drake London, this is what you do not expect. I'm actually pretty proud of you that you started him because Drake London is not an automatic start in like almost all leagues, but he busted out 172 receiving yards on 10 catches and a 2-point conversion. Let me explain something to you about Atlanta. They have legitimate weapons, and this is the ceiling. This is what they can do. The problem is the quarterback. And granted, the quarterback did this, but it's just not consistent. So, in the future, maybe these Atlanta skill position players are going to be like hot commodities if they can provide a quarterback. I think one of my ideas was if Chicago, who will have the number one pick, decides to move on from Justin Fields, maybe trade him to Atlanta for some more draft capital, and imagine Justin Fields with all of those weapons. I mean, pick any quarterback who's on the bubble who has talent and stick him there. Travis Etienne had a solid game, a rushing touchdown, even though the receiving yards and receiving yards is good, rushing yards not so good, but awesome score. Kamara had a down game, but this is an excellent score. And then David Njoku, tight end, just killing it. Um, who was throwing to him? It was Joe Flacco. So it was. This is crazy. This is a crazy tight end score. I don't know if you can count on this week after week, but maybe that's the connection that he needs from Joe Flacco. Kenneth Walker, not such a great game, but this is okay, I guess. It looks like running back by committee. Maybe it's one of those trending things. They're trying to ease him in and then bring his workload up as they bring Charbonnet's back down. They're both young backs though, so maybe they want a 50-50 thing. But it's not the running. It's not the bell cow status that he had early in the year. Jake Elliott had a solid kicking game in your Houston D that you chose, not so great. And then off the bench, here we have nothing much to write home about. It looks like, again, Cincinnati receivers riding that roller coaster of a backup quarterback. Jonathan Taylor is now doubtful. So maybe there's a possibility you can play him if you can advance in the playoffs. He's not out. He's now doubtful. So that's kind of there's a little hope there for you. Josh Dobbs on Morgan's side. The honeymoon is over, but thankfully you have Matthew Stafford. This is a pretty sneaky picking up Washington, who balled out last week as Jacksonville's rookie wide receiver. And this is encouraging for him to put this many points on a second game. You know, once you create some tape, you give defenses the opportunity to game plan for you. So he had a great game last week. Possibly there was a game plan for him this week, and he still performed. So that's a great job. Great job for Washington, and it bodes well for Morgan going forward. Okay, Richie versus James, another game of no consequence. Richie's Lamar Jackson balled out. CeeDee Lamb, solid game. Actually, excellent game. Brown didn't do anything. I don't know what happened to him. David Montgomery, they just kept feeding him, but it was more quantity than quality. But at least that gets you 11. Mixon, another solid game, 22.1. Dalton Kincaid kind of regressing a little bit. He's questionable, so that's I mean, it doesn't really matter. But we'll just talk about your players. Diggs didn't do much. Bass had a good game. Cleveland D, solid. For James and his team, this is a great score and bodes well. Tonga Viola did not do so well. I think one of the key takeaways from this was when Hill got hurt, that team, that offense does not look the same. And Tonga Viola already, for some reason, doesn't put up big numbers despite the offense being so prolific. And it was even worse without Tyreek Hill for half of the game. Cooper Kupp, solid and great. 115 receiving yards. Like we just said when we were talking about Matthew Stafford for Morgan, Cooper Kupp is going to be someone to reckon with, is because they're going to try to make the playoffs and they're healthy. A.J. Brown, again, regressing. The top teams kind of regressing. Rashad White, amazing game. Over 100 rushing yards and a catch for a touchdown. Zach Charbonnet, again, we said part of this committee, so that kind of diminishes his value, but he did okay, I guess. 44 rushing yards is pretty good. Tyler Conklin, a good tight end score by you. And then your MVP right now, Deebo Samuel. Ever since he's come back with the other guys who were injured, automatically, I think everyone is consensus says that San Francisco is the number one team, and it's kind of bearing out with the fantasy numbers too, especially with Deebo Samuel. 149 receiving yards. He's outperforming Christian McCaffrey at this point. Myers didn't do too much, but did okay, and the Denver D is a great pickup because that's a excellent score. They kind of like, it seemed like it was a close game, that Denver versus Chargers game, but then they just like destroyed them after. That Denver D is a big part of why they have a turnaround there. Of note on the bench, Lawrence, this is a miracle. He must see the same doctor that Aaron Rodgers had, because he was knocked out of the game last week, which cost Richie the playoffs. But he played just a couple days later. And then for James, off of your bench, oh boy, Herbert. This was a big loss for them. He's injured and out, so Chargers season is pretty much over. AJ Dillon had a solid game. JSN's I don't know. They went against, like we said, they went against San Francisco, and that game was actually pretty competitive until the wheels fell off for Seattle, and then San Francisco bowled them over. And then they don't have their starting quarterback anymore. They have what's his name, Locke, as the quarterback for now. So like the only like fantasy like relevant bench is like Dylan for you and Gibson, who was on a bye, and JSN. You will probably need to like fix these IR positions at this point as you proceed in the playoffs. Okay, Mike versus Jeremy. Uh, this is kind of eye-opening in some ways. Mike, this is kind of like a Mike's season in a nutshell. Russell Wilson didn't do too much. Devontae Adams didn't do too much. Justin Jefferson back finally from IR, gets blasted and has some bruised ribs, and then is taken immediately out of the game. Kyron Williams, solid. Singletary, okay. Dallas Goedert, pretty okay. Ayuk, pretty good. Folk and your Baltimore D, kind of mid, but that gets you to just under 100. But for Jeremy, this is kind of eye-opening because we're used to seeing Jeremy 140 plus. What happened here? Josh Allen did decent. Like we were talking about Keenan Allen trending down. Tyreek Hill, though, had a scary moment where he got tackled for a loss and then was injured, taken out of the game. But there's some relief because he did come back. But there is now a question mark. How healthy is Tyreek Hill going forward? And especially, they have the playoffs sewn up. It's a question of what is Miami going to do? Are they going to try to progress and fight for playoff seeding? Or are they content to be in the playoffs? And that's going to matter depending on what they do with Hill. Are they going to let him try to recover a little bit? How hurt is he? Are they going to fight for the playoff position and have him play in spite of an possible injury? All questions to consider. Raheem Mostert, though, had a huge game for them. He seems to take all the fantasy points from all the other Miami weapons. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. A lot of them were gifted though by Tennessee turning over the ball on their side of the field. DeAndre Swift is looking kind of mid, especially if they're trailing, like Philadelphia trailing, and they're trying to come back. DeAndre Swift is no longer a factor, even though they should involve him because he is a pass catching back. Evan Ingram, boom, baller. This is your best player of the week, and I think we were just singing the praises of that other tight end Njoku, but Ingram outplayed him. 2 receiving touchdown, 95 receiving yards. Huge game. DK Metcalf, he started out with a solid game, but penalty knocked him out of the game, and so he stopped short at the 12.2. Dicker only gave you an extra point, and that was a messy game, and the Miami D is actually pretty solid. This score would have been a lot bigger, but Tennessee showed some moxie, fought, and came back from a 2-touchdown deficit to steal this game, giving Miami their first loss. For the bench, nothing really to mention for Mike's bench. Stevenson is a big question mark. That does change. That impacts Ezekiel Elliott because Ezekiel Elliott is a bell cow. Cooper, decent game. Minshew is, I don't know. He's a backup quarterback, and then your Los Angeles Rams defense didn't do anything. Anything to mention for Jeremy? Jamal Williams didn't do anything. You have a big question mark on Pacheco, and Geno Smith has been out. Like we said, Locke was playing, but DeAndre Hopkins he was a huge part of that upset against Miami. He seems to have an excellent connection with Will Levis, and that probably changes things if you play him in place of maybe Tyreek Hill or even Keenan Allen. But there are question marks with Jeremy's receivers. The fortunate thing for him is he has such a high quantity of them that he can afford some bad plays. It's just a matter of making sure you play the right guys. Okay, now let's go to the games that matter. Let me just give an overview about what happened, because they were definitely scoreboard watching. It was Eric who was at the bottom of the and on the bubble, but inside on the playoffs, and Aaron, who was just outside of the bubble of the playoffs. So, what needed to happen? Eric needed to win to outright guarantee his place in the playoffs. And if he lost, he needed Aaron to lose also, maintain the record differential. Aaron, in order to win, he needed Eric to lose, and he needed to beat Gary to be able to make the playoffs. And it went down to the wire pretty much. And what made it really interesting was we had a Monday night that had two games that were playing at the same time, and there was a bunch of guys playing for all of these teams, right? So it really made a difference. As you can see from the outcome, Eric lost, and Aaron could not take care of business to beat Gary. So Eric basically gets into the playoffs thanks to Gary beating Aaron. So let's look at what happened here. Let's look at the scores for Eric. In general, like it seemed like Eric was gonna lose all along, but when it came to Monday, it actually got kind of interesting, and especially when you saw Tennessee fighting to steal that game from Miami, and Derrick Henry getting a touchdown. There was a chance where Eric could have just like ruled out any doubt and taken that playoff spot on his own. And so that's why this differential is as close as it is. It was not this close before through the course of the game. There was a time when it was like it was going to be a blowout and Eric had no chance. But let's see the scores. Prescott did an okay job. Brock Purdy balls out. Excellent job. So he may get MVP. Rashee Rice. Seems to be one of Eric's better late season pickups. Scoring a touchdown, 72 receiving yards. Garrett Wilson for Brad is okay. Solid. Zach Wilson came back and actually balled out, helping them win and just destroy Houston. Zay Flowers, kind of resuming some of the good play that he had earlier in the season. So Eric really needs him to blow up. Nico Collins, though, gets hurt and booted, and Houston completely changes once all their weapons are gone. Jaylen Warren played, and Harris played, so he played the Pittsburgh backfield, and they gave him a combined 14 points. Brad's running backs did much better. Bijan was starting to look a little bit more comfortable. He had a rushing touchdown, 54 receiving yards, 34 rushing yards, so great game for him. Devon A-Chain, though, did okay, but most of those scores, like we said, went to Mostert. He kind of did his work early and then didn't have much to do in the second half. Gerald Everett for Eric chose the tight end. He needed him because Taysom Hill didn't play. Got him some points, but Isaiah Likely balled out. He actually put up a Mark Andrews kind of score. And like we said, Derrick Henry for Eric almost was starting to have a game where it became a thing where like Eric could have gotten the playoffs on his own. Zach Moss on Brad's side did okay. Younghoe Koo didn't do too much. Sanders kind of almost doubles that up. Actually, he did double that up. And then the defense both kind of like pretty average. Off the bench, nothing Eric could have really done. There was a time where it looked like T. Higgins could have played better, but he actually chose the right receiver. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire didn't do too much. Question marks on Aaron Jones and Taysom Hill. The hope is, I guess, for Eric is for Taysom Hill to get healthy because he has the potential as the ultimate flex player to give like a bunch of points. And then for Brad, a really big score from Cook, who looks like prime Dalvin Cook, his brother. 83 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown, 58 rushing yards in their win, knocking off Kansas City. Addison, this is kind of weird because, I mean, this became like the worst game, might have been the worst game I've ever seen. When Minnesota played Las Vegas, a soccer game broke out. The final score was 3-0. And it was just a field goal by Minnesota. Nothing else. That was a fantasy black hole. Nothing happened there. Jerry Jeudy didn't do too much. And Myers didn't do too much either. Lessons just for Brad. I don't know. I think Brad is playing it fine. It's just what happens sometimes is injuries. And that will kind of like tank your season. That does kind of change things where you really need to hit on waivers. Even that is kind of a crapshoot. So, because Eric lost, he has to rely on this game. Gary becomes the proxy person to try to battle for that player spot against Aaron, because Aaron is also fighting for that playoff spot. And this is a 101-112. This is kind of tragic for Aaron, because I think had he played this right, he wins this game. You see, a point differential is about 11, a little bit over 11. For Gary, being able to get this 112, Baker Mayfield, pretty nice, decent pickup to give you that over 20 points. Jalen Waddle was a big reason why this game ended the way it is, because he had built enough capital in the game, but it was Jalen Waddle scoring at the end of the game that kind of like pushed him over the edge. In addition to the kicker, Carlson, who just kicked so many points and just ended Aaron's hopes. Puka Nacua did okay. Ford did okay. Javonte Williams balled out. Kelsey did good. This would have been a little bit higher had they counted that, had they not blown that penalty. Madison, pretty mid. And the Green Bay D, this was the only thing that was kind of helping Aaron for a little bit, because those points were kind of diminishing as the Giants were like destroying Green Bay, you know? Green Bay was kind of trending up. They beat like Detroit Lions, playoff team. They beat Kansas City, playoff team. And now they face the Giants and they lose to them. But it was a battle. Like we said, there was parity is kind of like bearing out towards the end of the season. For Aaron, let's skip his quarterback. We'll come back to him. Mike Evans only had 1 reception for 8 receiving yards. That's why Godwin was wide receiver 1. Chris Olave did okay. Austin Eckler had a nice bounce back, being able to get a rushing touchdown and getting this nice score. Pollard also had pretty decent, like we said, as of late. George Kittle balled out, outplaying Kelsey in this game. Michael Pittman Jr., excellent score. Tucker, great score. The Pittsburgh D didn't do too much. And then on the bench for Gary, Brown, solid pickup. He gets you 80 receiving yards and a touchdown. He's a running back with wide receiver stats. This was an interesting play, playing Josh Jacobs over Ford, Williams, and even Madison. And it was a big question mark. A lot of people were questioning it, but this is one of the things where when you have a fan of the team, they have some inside information. So credit to Gary to be able to make this call, choosing the right running back and knowing when to bench Josh Jacobs. I think the majority of people who are not Raiders fans would probably have played him. And then for Aaron, Reed, big time game, 1 rushing touchdown. Jordan Love didn't do too much. The Kansas City D didn't do too much. But here's the biggest mishap, and this is the 3rd week in a row that we're talking about it, because it was a big question mark about who do you start. Do you start Justin Fields, or do you start CJ Stroud? So Aaron, with your playoff hopes on the line, chose CJ Stroud. We have the the benefit of hindsight, and I think here are the reasons why you should have started Justin Fields. We did say running is a big difference, but Justin Fields was trending up, and that's some points for Justin Fields. They played Detroit really, really competitively, and he just plays really well against Detroit historically. And they won. So that kind of like bared out. CJ Stroud, on the other hand, lost Tank Dell, so you already is a big question mark because you lost his favorite target. But I understand starting him because, you know, CJ Stroud has built so much equity and so much capital regarding his ability to play as a starting quarterback in the NFL, even as a rookie. But there comes a point when you don't have enough weapons where it hurts. And that's what happened to CJ Stroud. He lost Tank Dell. Nico Collins kind of balled out last week in spite of that. And there are some other guys. But the moment that Nico Collins got hurt, CJ Stroud started to look like Bryce Young in Carolina. And I'm sure that's what CJ Stroud was like. This must be what Bryce Young feels like. And unfortunately for Aaron, because of that, he loses. If he starts Justin Fields in place of CJ Stroud, Aaron is in the playoffs and Eric is on the outside looking in. There's another change here, right? You could have played Reed in place of Evans, but that's less obvious, right? That's more of like a, let me just take a gamble with that and maybe it'll work out. But he had two chances to be able to pull off the win, and unfortunately, the decisions came to bite Aaron in the end. Aaron had a great team. It was just tough the way it played out, and he's going to miss the playoffs. So, that is our weekly recap. What does that mean for the season? We now have the playoffs. We have a 3-week playoffs. This is the wild card round. Because Mike and Jeremy were able to build up so much equity with those wins, they are granted a bye. That leaves a rematch between Morgan and Darren. Like we said, Morgan is kind of trending upwards. Darren a little bit down. I think one of the wild cards is Jonathan Taylor going to play this week? Probably not. But like we said, anything can happen. So there's the rematch to be able to proceed. And then there's James versus Eric. Winner between Morgan and Darren gets the chance to play Mike. Winner between James and Eric will play Jeremy. Anyways, great job by everybody for the regular season. It was a pretty fun and interesting season, especially when you spend more time and taking a look at it, like how things matter. And then we'll see what happens with the playoffs. We have some guys who were former champions. Mike is a former champion. Eric is a former champion, and James is a former champion. And we have 3 potential first-time title holders. Morgan, Darren, and James have never won a championship in our league. So we'll see. Pretty nice mix there. Anyways, that's the recap for the regular season. And so look forward to next week as the playoffs and the wild card round starts. All right. See ya. Bye.